This podcast is brought to you by AJ Bell and Shares Magazine. Shares Magazine is published by AJ Bell Media, part of AJ Bell.
Hi, welcome to the AJ Bell Money and Markets podcast. I'm Dan Coatsworth, and with me this week for another bumper episode is Danni Hewson. Hi there, Danni.
Hi, Dan. Hi, everyone. Yes, once again, we have got loads of markets news for you, including London-listed miner Anglo American's bid to take over Canadian copper miner Teck Resources, tricky times for UK retailers like Dunelm and Primark, and Tesla's share of the US EV market falls to an 8-year low. We'll be assessing Elon Musk's proposed $1 trillion pay deal.
Markets have generally endured quite a bit of turbulence as tensions rise in the Middle East. We've had France, Japan and Argentina deal with their own political issues. Plus, we're just days away from what's expected to be the US Fed's first interest rate cut in a year. And Governor Lisa Cook will be one of the decision makers after a federal judge ruled that the president didn't have cause to fire her.
We'll also run through the latest index reshuffles, and our guest is George Bennett, the CEO of Rainbow Rare Earths, discussing how his company hopes to take advantage of demand for those minerals crucial to so much of our tech.
Now, you're going to have to keep listening to hear all that, because we're actually going to start out with a pensions special, and we're really delighted to be joined by AJ Bell's Head of Public Policy and Pensions Guru, Rachel Vahey. Hi there, Rachel.
Hi, Dan. Hi, Danni. I'm very excited that you've invited me on to talk about my absolute favourite subject.
Who else would we have on, Rachel? And the timing definitely calls for it. Look, if you've not already sussed it out, Pension Awareness Week is upon us. I thought it was worth just touching on the history of this now fixture of the financial calendar, because it's down to, and I hope you don't mind me calling you a pension geek, Rachel, but it's down to pension geeks like you. You thought of it back in 2014, or at least geeks like you did, thinking that people needed to engage more with their future financial lives, especially with pension freedoms coming in the following year.
Yes, that's right, Danni. A lot of this was driven by the pension freedoms introduction, which was a massive shake-up for pension savers and for the industry. And those came in 2015. And just to cast your mind back, I don't know if everyone's going to remember this, but yes, I was a pension geek in 2014 as well. But it was all to do with George Osborne standing up and saying, instead of buying an annuity, you no longer have to do that. You have got so many more options about what you want to do with your pension pot when you get to take the money out. But these options are obviously a little bit confusing. If you're giving people more choice and you give us all a little bit more choice and a little bit more flexibility, then we've all got really quite tough decisions to make about when do we get the money out and how do we spend it? How do we use it? Do we take the whole pension pot out and just encash it fully? And what sort of income tax would we have to pay on that? Or do we put it into drawdown and then leave it invested and just take a little bit of income at a time? Or do we just go and buy an annuity, which is when you go up to an insurance company and give them a pot of money and then they pay you a guaranteed income for the rest of your life? Now, there's pros and cons with all of those options, and what options best for you really comes down to your personal circumstances. So the government at the same time as introducing this set up a guidance service called PensionWise. Now, if you're over the age of 50, you can get in touch with PensionWise and they will give you they'll go through a telephone interview with you. It's about an hour. It's really quite in depth, but they'll give you lots of help about what those options are. But remember, you're also going to get stacks of information through pension providers like AJ Bell. And also, if you need to, you can get in touch with a regulated advisor. But because there's so many more options about what people could do, the penny dropped really for the government, and they said, yeah, we need to do something to make sure people are taking better care of their pension and are much more aware of what's going on.
So I did see that the pension industry has brought in the big guns this year, trying to grab your attention. Now, we'll talk a bit about Pensions Week in a second, but before that, we've got to talk about this advert, Ross Kemp fronting the fourth pension attention campaign. That's found nearly a fifth of us prioritize physical fitness over our future financial preparations. And so this campaign is urging us to pile on the pound. So I guess, Danny, what is this, like Grant Mitchell, Eastenders situation, or is it something a little bit different here?
Well, yeah, there is a touch of Grant Mitchell in it. Have you seen it yet, the advert?
I haven't, no.
I've seen it. It's very entertaining. It's certainly, it grabs your attention.
Hugely entertaining. It really is. So Ross Kemp effectively is training. And this is all off the back of, you need to pile on the pounds for your pension, where, of course, when you're training, usually, well, quite often, certainly I'm trying to lose the pounds. So there's a nice little play on that. But he's being coached by a pensions guru, Burleson, and they're effectively saying, look, you pay a huge amount of attention to looking after your body. Well, maybe it's time to pay a huge amount of attention to looking after your pension. And it's clever, it's fun, it's approachable. And if just one person sees it and goes, Ross Kemp's told me I should think about my pension, well, that is a really good thing. And look, long-term listeners to our podcast will know that we've given loads of tips over the years to give your pension some attention. But just as a recap, Rachel, how should we start?
I think the first thing is really just to find out what you've got. I think that's the major problem with many of us, and I'm putting myself in that bracket as well. Now, in days gone by, I would have said to people, right, what you've got to do is every time you get a pension statement through the door, you shove it in a shoebox, you put it up in the cupboard somewhere, and then you ignore it. So what you need to do is open that shoebox. Now, we no longer get things through the mail and through the front door and the postman. So we now get these online, but it's exactly the same philosophy. You've just got to go rooting back through your emails. You've got to dig out those old passwords and login details, and you've got to just try and figure out what you actually have got. Now, it's really easy to miss certain pensions because from the 2012 onwards, so for the last 13 years, we've been automatically enrolled into a new pension scheme every time we change employer. Now, if you think that we're going to have maybe 11 employers throughout our life, then that's, you're getting to quite a number of pension schemes just hanging around there where you might have easily forgotten about them. So go through your employment history. And even if you were only at that place for about 6 months and you really don't want to go back there mentally or physically, just think, what pension did I build up when I was there? And just try and find all the details. Update your passwords, have a rummage round, have a look at what you've got in there. How much money have you built up? Where is it invested? Are there what sort of pension scheme is it? Because as we know, pensions can come in different shapes and sizes. So it might be a nice, straightforward SIP or personal pension, but it could be a different type of workplace scheme. For example, a master trust or an occupational scheme or even a defined benefit scheme. So have a look at exactly what you've got. And also figure out who your provider is. Now, the older ones amongst us, and I'm putting myself in that category, we've seen a lot of change with pension providers. They change names, they change companies. Sometimes they've changed it 2 or 3 times since you originally took out the plan. So have a look at exactly who owns it, how much money you've got there, are you still contributing, how much it's worth, and when can you get hold of it? So lots of things to think about to try and figure out where it is, but get to know your pensions.
So I guess a good thing to do is go from 15th of September for a week, coinciding with this Pensions Awareness Week on AJ Bell's website. We're going to have there's a special little Power Up Your Pensions hub there. And we've got articles and videos with lots of information about whether you're if you're young or old, what you need to do when thinking about building up this retirement pot, and even managing once you start to retire. But let's talk now. Let's just want to work out this sort of I guess the magic number. How much do we actually need in retirement? So Rachel, please tell me the answer. Is it an easy thing to find out, establish?
Well, as a Douglas Adams fan, I'm really tempted to say it's a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy 42, Dan, because that is the answer to life, the universe, and everything. I think it's old-fashioned budgeting. It's going back to absolute basics. It's working out, first of all, what you have got, and as I said, do that by rummaging through statements and figure out what you've got, and sometimes that can be difficult because you'll have several different pension pots, but you might want to think about combining them all as well. So you've just got one login to look at and makes life easier. But also have a look at your state pension, when your state pension comes in and whether you're going to get the full value of that. And you can do that really easily by going online to the government and just asking for that information. So figure out what you've got and then figure out what you need. Now, there are several ways you can do this. Pensions UK is an organisation that have put out some retirement living standards, and they've looked at how people live their life, and they've come out with 3 different standards: minimum, moderate, and comfortable. And they said if you're going to live like quite a minimum income, like just the bare what you need to sort of like just survive, then you're going to need 13,400 if you're an individual, but if you're in a couple, you'll need 21,600 between you. So, but if you want a more moderate lifestyle, a little bit more comfort, a few more visits out and about, maybe a holiday, these sorts of things, you're going to need more money. And again, if you're going to go for a comfortable retirement where you're traveling and doing all those things you said that you would do when you reach retirement, then you're going to need more money still. But the retirement living standards can give you a good finger in the air feel for how much money you need. And then, but another way you can do it is just by budgeting. I've just gone through this process myself and figured out how much money do I spend today? What things would fall away if I'm in retirement? I wouldn't need to commute anymore. The children might leave home. I don't know if they ever will, but they might do. They might leave home and come back, but yeah, they might leave home, so I might not have to be them. All these sorts of things. What are you going to spend your money on? So again, it could just be old-fashioned budgeting, just actually sitting down there with a calculator and a pen and just thinking about it. And that can be really quite scary, but I think it's scarier still just to go into retirement without an idea about what sort of money you need.
And I should just say that we have a sister podcast called Money Matters, and our next episode is going to be talking to one of our AJ Bell Money Matters fellow pension geeks, Lisa Webster, and we're digging in really to some of the issues which face you if you are single, if you're going through divorce or have gone through divorce, or you're bereaved. So if you're interested, do take a listen to that. It's very much aimed at helping women feel comfortable with their finances, but as always, it is relevant to lots of people. You mentioned the state pension. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about the state pension, about the triple lock, about, whether or not the age that we get the state pension is going to change even beyond what you've spoken about. I suppose when we're thinking about pensions, we always tend to think about the state pension as well. Do we need to be thinking differently?
I think it's really important to, first of all, know how much state pension you're going to get. You need to build up 35 years of paying in national insurance contributions to get your full state pension. And I think most of us will probably qualify, but there are sometimes, I took some years off, for example, when my kids were small. So there are going to be some of us who maybe have taken some time out of the rat race in the career just to and think they may have gaps. So first of all, find out what you've got, and as I said, that's fairly easy to do. It's very difficult the state pension is a really good foundation. It's a substantial amount. It's coming up to £12,000 a year now. So it's a substantial amount of money to give you that real good foundation to build your retirement income on. So it's really important. But it's also quite difficult to predict because we just don't know what's going to happen to increases in the future. And that's obviously up to future government. And it's such a political hot potato that it's difficult to try and second guess that. You can only deal in the things that you know, can't you, at the end of the day? So knowing how much of the state pension you're going to get, whether it's the full state pension or not, understanding when you're going to get it, because the state pension age is now 66 for both men and women. And although that might sound obvious to many people out there, there are still some people who are surprised by that and still haven't realized it's gone up. But it's going to go up to 67 from 2028 onwards. 67 from 2028 onwards, and then it's going to go up to 68, but we're a little bit unsure on the timing of that, but it could affect some people listening in today. So just get to know as much as you can. As I said, it's difficult to second guess what politicians will do.
So I guess once you got a sort of a figure in mind, and you factored in the state pension to some of your calculations, what do you do next? I'm particularly thinking, what if you don't actually have enough and you're not on track to actually what you really want to achieve?
I think it's never too late to start thinking. It's never too late. I think that would be my first thing. So I think some people will think, I'm just going to throw the towel in. I haven't got as much. It's really quite depressing. But don't do that. Have a think about what you've got currently and see what you can do to build on that. For example, one of the best ways is to look at what your employer offers you through pension contributions. Employers have to pay a minimum amount in under automatic enrolment, but they could pay in more. They may be offering to pay in more if you too put in more money. So it's a matching contribution. So have a look at the details. Get in touch with your employer. If you can't find it on the intranet or website, then go and speak to someone in HR or personnel or people management or whatever it's called, and go and speak to them, and they'll be able to help you figure out what you can get, because that's often free money. They can't give it to you in any other form. So it's your money. So go claim it. But then you can start to think about other things. Can you put in any more contributions on top of what you're getting? Even if you don't get the employer matching, can you do that? Pensions are a really tax advantageous way of saving. So think about what you can personally afford. Think about your investment strategies. Sometimes your pensions might be invested in quite a cautious strategy, but you've got quite a few years to go to retirement. So you can afford to take on a little bit of more risk. So have a route round, see what options are available, what you feel comfortable with, and start thinking about investment and what your attitude to risk might be and what you feel comfortable doing. Also get to know any special features. So some of the older pensions in particular will have some special features aligned to them. So make sure you just know those. But I would always say just, don't give up. Look at how much you're being charged for a pension as well, and think about swapping that to a different pension if you think you can get a better deal that suits you and your personal circumstances. But there is always something you can do. So please don't give up. Just get to know that pension.
And I know one of the things that we've got on our website, Rachel, is a great series, which is breaking down what you should do with your pension depending on your age. So do take a look at that. And as Dan said, there's going to be loads next week for you to really get your teeth into, right, Dan?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's going to be lots of really good articles, really good videos, and really importantly, and say it ranges from people in their 20s and 30s to obviously in the 50s and 60s and stuff. I think a lot of people assume that retirement sort of based articles are only aimed at sort of older people, either just about to retire or in retirement. But no, like we've got things to really help people at all ages along the way. And say it's from 15th of September they'll be there for a week. But actually, even if you're watching this video, you listen to this podcast, and that those sort of date period is past, AgeBell website is absolutely full of really good stuff all year round, and it's all free to read.
Thank you.
Okay, Rachel, thank you so much for being with us on the podcast. Thank you for being our pension geek.
Oh, I loved it. I'm very happy to come back and be a geek any other time.
Right, time to crack on with quite a bit of news on the market side. I'll start off with probably the biggest deal we've seen in the mining sector for ages, certainly over the last sort of decade. And that is the Anglo American's deal to buy Canadian rival Teck Resources. So this is going to create a approximate 50 billion global copper mining group. And what's really interesting is that both of these parties have been takeover targets themselves in recent years. So Glencore tried to buy Teck Resources and failed. BHP tried and failed to buy Anglo American. So what's happening now? You've got two takeover targets bolting themselves together, and then suddenly they become this, really big. They're already big names, but they become an even bigger force in the mining sector. So obviously, copper is very much in demand. It's heavily linked to what's going on with the energy transition. So whether that's electric vehicles moving from combustion engine to electric power, whether it's to do with the rise of renewable energy, because you find copper in things like wind turbines and stuff. And of course, it's just linked to technology and electronic devices. All these things contain copper. So essentially what Anglo is doing is, by buying Teck, it's increasing its sort of copper deposit portfolio. It's got lots of different projects here, which it's hoping will keep it really at the top of the pack in terms of supplying this forecast strong market for copper well into the future. So there's some good things and bad things to think about. The good is that if you're a London London market focused investor, Anglo American's quoted on the London Stock Exchange. It's going to keep its main stock market listing here, so there won't be any sort of changes to the shares you might already own here. But it's actually going to move its headquarters to Canada. Now, naturally, that will lead to quite a lot of job cuts in the UK. So, it's a bit of sort of a downer here, because obviously there's, just general concerns about the state of the jobs market. And of course, Anglo actually, while you think, okay, this is a company that's got mines all around the world, it did have a significant presence, hundreds of people working in the UK. And so now, those jobs are going to, I'm sure some people will be offered jobs to go and work in Canada, but let's be realistic. How many people are going to go there? So I think it's very interesting. And really the question now is, because these two takeover targets are bolted together, does that mean that they're no longer a takeover target? Can someone else actually come and afford to buy this enlarged group? So now this deal hasn't completed by any means. Shareholders still have to vote for it, but there is the feeling in the market is that this one should go through in the absence of someone else coming to try and sort of derail this bid situation.
Stay with us, because we have got a chat on rare earths at the end of the show. It's kind of like we planned this whole episode, Dan. Amazing. I'm going to talk retail now, though, because on Friday last week, we're recording this Wednesday lunchtime, we got the delayed retail sales figures for July from the Office for National Statistics. And despite the fact that obviously they apologise for issues with their data, it was actually quite good news for the retail sector. So we saw a 0.6% jump in sales volumes in July. Not great news for food in July, but certainly clothing in particular enjoyed quite a boost because of the warm weather. You often find spending in July is very much determined by how people are feeling, and how people are feeling tends to be determined by the weather, especially here in the UK. We also, of course, had the Women's Euros, and we've also had some figures from the British Retail Consortium looking at sales for August, and that again is a continuation of a good news story. So a 3.1% jump. Food, in this case, has enjoyed a decent time out, up 4.7%. But here is the stinger, because although the British Retail Consortium has delivered this good news, and let's be honest, the retail sector has needed some good news, because it didn't have a great period sort of from April, May time. But what they have said is they are deeply concerned about what is going to happen to the consumer, particularly in the run-up to the budget. Did you notice the date of the budget, Dan, comes just 2 days before Black Friday?
No, I didn't. Oh, crikey, now you pointed it out to me. Interesting.
It is interesting because, of course, as we get the huge amount of speculation, which, let's be honest, we've already had, and it's going to continue and continue until we get to the 26th of November, people get nervous. They're nervous that taxes might go up. They're nervous that if taxes don't go up on themselves, that it might go up further on their employer. And we've already seen a weakening of the employment, the labour market. And that's something certainly that we have had commentary on from a number of our UK listed retailers. So we saw Dunelm, and I confess the last couple of days I've spent an awful lot of time in Dunelm as my daughter gets ready to go off to university. In fact, maybe single-handedly helped give them a sales boost, and their numbers looked pretty good. Sales, profits, okay, but the market didn't like it. Didn't like it for a couple of reasons. First of all, because the debt levels on the business have gone up. Secondly, margins have sort of been narrowed a little bit, but also because of commentary about the state of the consumer. And that same commentary was also delivered by the Primark-owned Associated British Foods. So the ABF chair, George Bennett, actually was talking about the instability in Europe. And I'm going to talk a bit more about what's going on with geopolitics. But the impact of that instability in Europe on the European consumer and the concern about higher taxes in the UK on the UK consumer. And if you think about the consumer that Primark is aiming for, it is people with less cash, so less affluent people. And when less affluent people are concerned about the potential of losing their job, the ABF chair says, well, this causes a slowdown in sales. And we saw a significant fall in shares this morning for Associated British Foods, down 10%, because it is expecting weaker sales in the second half of the year, significantly below expectations. And it's sort of hard to know what the consumer is feeling at the moment, because we've had a decent summer, we've had a decent amount of sports, some fantastic events which people have wanted to go and spend on, but we're also seeing consumer caution. So Jet2 last week put out a warning saying that people are not booking until the last minute, which is making it very difficult for them to plan. And I think in terms of consumer weakness, this is likely to be something that we're going to be talking about between now and the really important retail period of time, which, of course, is the run-up to Christmas.
If we're talking about changes to what consumers are thinking about and their spending and the impact of the budget, and, of course, just Christmas simply just being around the corner from that, the big event, and we're going to hear from Rachel Vahey, as you say, a couple of days before Black Friday and stuff. It does feel like there is a danger that we could see a real pause on consumer spending. And I guess, this is probably quite a good link into, in terms of like going from people watching their spending to someone who is literally swimming in money. And if you thought you had a small swimming pool, it's about to get a lake, according to proposals. And I'm talking about Elon Musk. So, Danny, you must have heard this story about Tesla proposing to award Elon Musk $1 trillion if he hits targets over the next decade. Do you think that sounds a bit dangerous?
It is a huge amount, isn't it? And the thing that worries me is not whether or not, investors think that Elon Musk is worth it, but the potential it has, the knock-on it could have to corporate America. Will other bosses say, actually, I quite fancy a $1 trillion pay packet, please?
Yeah, well, I think just looking at this deal, there is a risk that could happen, because I reckon there's going to be a ton of shareholders going to go, yes, it's a big number, but if he achieves all these goals and hits the targets, we'll all be winners. And so what's happening here is that Tesla's saying, Elon Musk, we want you to boost Tesla's valuation 8-fold over the next decade, sell 1 million artificial intelligent robots, sell another 12 million electric vehicles, and some other goals, like the first one being he's got to double Tesla's market value to $2 trillion. That's the first milestone. Clearly, if he achieves these, the value of the company will go up, the share price will go up, shareholders will be very happy. So you can see that they're pretty much in favor of it. I can just see a situation like that. Now, other companies are going to go, look, imagine how, if we were to put down some targets and, that fired up the chief exec to drive growth even more, is that all it takes? Just simply have to say to our leader, how much do you want? And so I think it's a bit crazy, really. To me, it's like Tesla is not one person. It's a big team of people, tens of thousands of very smart people create what this business is. It's not one person. So why should a single person be able to get that huge amount of money? And I think as a business, Tesla is not doing as well as it has done. It is struggling to fight off competition from people like China's BYD. Electric vehicle sales haven't been going that great. And share price has been weak, quite volatile. And so in those normal situation, you probably get a board saying, have we got the right person to lead the company? But bizarrely, they're saying, rather than saying to Elon Musk, why should you keep your job? They're saying, we'll give you whatever you want to stay. It just seems a bit odd. Now, I think it's worth in the sort of in case of fairness and balance. Elon Musk does clearly have the type of energy that makes him, entrepreneurial, full of bright ideas, always think about stuff, really big picture stuff. And you can see why he has been successful. You can see why people have follows every word. He's got a huge following, and he isn't simply just sort of giving a good talk. He's actually doing good stuff, but he's also increasingly being this Marmite character. Lots of people don't like what he's been doing with American politics. They don't like his outspoken views. They could argue that actually he's doing more harm to good with his association with the Tesla brand because of these sort of activities outside of his day job. So to me, it's like, there is this danger that we get lots of other companies saying, okay, let's dig a bit deeper. If shareholders are happy, we'll just give these, the company bosses what they want to try and achieve big growth goals. But just before I sort of wrap this bit up, I wanted to just reference an article in the Financial Times where it made some quite interesting comments. And it said, what does it mean for the world when an individual can land a bonus equivalent to more than twice gold held in Fort Knox? Such a person would have access to assets and influence that's hard to fathom. And I think, this is the situation here. So I won't dwell on this anymore. We've got lots of things we want to talk about. So Danny, I know, you've been looking at markets and there's been an absolute ton of stuff going on. What's been catching your eye this week?
There has been a ton of stuff going on. It's been really hard to know where to start with all the geopolitical issues that we've been facing. And, just today we're talking about Poland downing a Russian drone, the first time a NATO member has fired during the Ukraine war. We've got the situation in the Middle East where Israel has attacked Qatar. And all of this is impacting markets, though to a lesser degree than I think maybe we might have been expecting. Some of the things that we would expect to happen have happened. So we've seen the oil price rise. We have seen defense companies jumping up because of the increased tensions. But we've also seen huge Wall Street records, again, off the expectation that the AI bubble, which a lot of people were wondering, is it going to pop over the summer? Well, we had some results out from Oracle, which suggests no, the AI bubble is actually soaring to greater heights. And that has sort of cushioned some of the issues that we face. And I was just taking a look because, it's not just those two geopolitical hotspots that we've been talking about for a year, we've also had issues in France with Emmanuel Macron having to appoint a new prime minister, the fifth prime minister in less than 2 years, and concerns there about huge debt levels impacting the borrowing cost there. We've also had the Nikkei, the markets there, actually rising off the expectation that a new prime minister, after the prime minister there resigned, that a new prime minister might actually do the economy in Japan a sort of good deed. And Argentina as well. We saw markets tumbling on Monday after a huge defeat for President Javier Milei's party in local elections. So an awful lot going on. But then in the midst of all of this, investors are thinking it's all okay. Because first of all, we've got the AI boom. But second, we're expecting an interest rate cut from the US Federal Reserve. And it's been fascinating looking at expectation of what's going to happen, because the first cut in a year, markets expect, is totally nailed on. Now the question is, how big will that cut be? Will it be 25 basis points, or will it be 50 basis points? And in the backdrop of all of this, we have Donald Trump and his bid to really rein in the independence of the Fed. And of course, he had sacked one of the governors, Lisa Cook, but a federal judge has temporarily blocked that sacking. So she will be there when the Federal Reserve makes its decision next week. She voted, along with Jerome Powell, against making an interest rate cut last time out. But of course, things are looking a bit more precarious in the United States, particularly when it comes to jobs. So we had a new set of revised jobs figures, which showed that there were 911,000 fewer jobs created in the 12 months to March than had been expected. Now, that is a big drop in the number of jobs created. And that, of course, then really does provide the cover for this interest rate cut. But it does still raise questions about what is going on, because even though temporarily the judge has blocked the firing of Lisa Cook, it's expected to go to the Supreme Court. And then I think markets really haven't properly priced in the potential implications of a Federal Reserve which has lost some of at least the auspices of independence.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things there. Obviously, the independence is one issue, but really, before we even sort of can get any sort of more progress in terms of where that might go, typically an interest rate cut is positive for the stock market, because it lowers the cost of borrowing for businesses and consumers, which means that they might want to borrow more money, they might want to go and spend more money, and that can drive the economy. I think here is if you get a bigger cut, that not if we're talking about half a basis point, 50 basis points, half a percentage, that might send a different message of one of the central bank is actually really, really worried about the state of the economy, so they have to do something bigger than usual to try and ease monetary policy. So I think it's going to be a very difficult one to call. And of course, we keep getting these different data points, and then the data points get revised. That situation alone is kind of hard to properly read. But when you've got a backdrop of arguably political instability in many parts of the world, you've got tensions in parts of the world on sort of a military level, the sort of the trade war that's still playing out, and changes to tax, inflation, and so there is a lot going on, and it's pretty good, Danny, that we're back from our summer break with a podcast, because what we try and do is to sort of unpick all this information each week and try and try to explain what it really means from an investor's perspective. So, but yeah, you can as always, we always say this thing. It's like there's always going to be something going on in the world, and you just have to try and take a step back to understand what it really means, rather than sort of making any knee-jerk reactions if you're an investor.
And I know that business as usual has been carrying on while all of this sort of roller coaster ride geopolitically has been happening. And one of the things which has been happening, which happens with, like clockwork, is reshuffling of indices.
Yeah, so the big one that in the UK, the main indices that we all follow. If you ever hear about the stock market on the news, inevitably, if they're talking about the UK, it'll be the FTSE 100. So a basket of the 100 biggest companies on the UK stock market. Every quarter, sort of FTSE Russell, the index provider, reshuffle stuff because inevitably things move up and down in value, and what it does, it just rebalances to make sure it's now got the 100 biggest companies of that point every 3 months. So we've had some interesting movements because I'm looking at this data a week ago and it didn't look like there's going to be too much, but it only takes a day or two of like big share price movements to suddenly put people in the promotion or relegation zone. So we'll see some changes that come into effect on the 22nd of September. Burberry is going back into FTSE 100. I've also got a new name to the market called Maitland Energy and Markets. So this is only fairly recently popped onto the UK stock market. It's a mining company. I think maybe we'll take a closer look at what it does because I'm certainly not that familiar apart from just its name at the moment. But of course, when things go in, other things get pumped out. So Taylor Wimpey and Unite are both being kicked out of FTSE 100. They're both property-linked companies. And talk about fallen angel. ASOS is losing its place in the FTSE 250 index, and so the company's been struggling for quite a few years now. And basically others are sort of overtaking it in terms of market valuation. So farewell ASOS from the big sort of the two big sort of FTSE indices, and now it's going to be a real small cap stock, and potentially gets a bit lost amongst the weeds, really.
Yeah, absolutely. As promised, now we have our special guest this week. George Bennett is the CEO of Rainbow Rare Earths, the company listed in 2017, and is aiming to become a major player in the massively important rare earths market, which has been dominated by China. But why are rare earths so important? Where do we find them? And what part is Rainbow Rare Earths hoping to play? First of all, thank you so much for talking to us on the AJ Bell Money and Markets podcast. It's been in the news quite a lot recently, the term rare earths. But for those people that maybe haven't come across it before, or maybe they've heard the term on the news and they're like, okay, well, I know that Donald Trump's talking about it a lot, but what are they? What are they used for? Why are they so important?
Well, thanks for hosting me on your podcast this morning. And let me try and give your audience a bit of insight into rare earths. There's 17 elements that are mined in what's known as a rare earth deposit. And these 17 elements all have different properties. They're termed critical minerals right now. And unfortunately, they've become very, very critical for our modern society. Modern tech doesn't function without rare earth elements in it. And if I can just sort of explain to you, the four key rare earth elements of these 17 I mentioned are neodymium, praseodymium, dysprosium, and terbium. These are known as permanent magnet rare earths. And permanent magnets go into, as I said, all modern tech. So your cell phone vibrates with a permanent magnet. Your AirPods have permanent magnets in them. Very small, but nevertheless you have them. Your handheld sort of drill will have a permanent magnet motor in it. And it goes into, as I said, all consumer electronics, which are very important in the modern world. Your drones have permanent magnet motors in it. And then, very importantly, all your motor vehicles, not only your plug-in hybrids and your electric motor vehicles, but even an ICE, what they call an ICE vehicle, that's internal combustion engine. In other words, your normal petrol and diesel vehicle, they have about 1 kilogram of permanent magnets per vehicle. Then you have a plug-in hybrid and electric vehicles have between 3 and 5 kilograms of permanent magnets in them. So as you can see, with the green sort of revolution and everyone going towards green energy through electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids, the permanent magnets are key in those vehicles, but they're even key for your standard motor vehicle. Then we have wind turbines. So wind turbines, which are also very, very big in this green transition that everyone is aiming to achieve by 2050, A direct drive wind turbine has 2 tons of permanent magnets per turbine. And of those 2 tons of permanent magnets, about 700 kilograms are rare earth elements in those wind turbines. So once again, very, very critical for that aspect of modern technology. And then we move even further into what I call the new frontier of permanent magnet demand, which translates to rare earth demand, is your robotics and your air mobility, which is basically your air taxis.
Rare earths are going to be important, and that's where the geopolitics comes into it, because China, obviously hugely influential there, controls the lion's share, not just of supply, but also the processing capacity. So what has changed recently? Because we're now talking about it a lot more in the West, certainly the United States is getting much more involved in these discussions.
Yeah, so the West has realized that your supply chains are dominated by these permanent magnets, which are dominated by China, and it doesn't make good business sense to rely on one supplier for anything. But very importantly, the Chinese are weaponizing rare earths. When tariffs were put on China by the US, the first thing the Chinese did was ban the export of certain permanent magnets and of certain rare earth elements to the West. And you saw, vehicle production lines in the US and in Europe grind to a halt because suddenly they didn't have these key elements to build these vehicles. As I say, it doesn't only affect electric vehicles, it affects your normal internal combustion engine vehicle. They can't function without permanent magnets as well. There might be less of them in the vehicle, but they still can't function without it. And then, as I said, all your other modern tech requires these permanent magnets. So 30 years ago, I used to use a quote in my presentations. Xi Jinping of China, the Premier of China at the time, came out with a quote which he said, "The Middle East has oil, China has rare earths." That was 30 years ago. And they decided they realized the strategic importance of these rare earth elements, and they decided that they were going to dominate this area. And they built that domination over 30 years. And now the West is realizing that they can't rely on this Chinese domination. Your geopolitics are, as we all know, quite fraught at the moment on a number of fronts, and especially between America and China. And when your biggest potential enemy is supplying you with these key elements, that's not a good place to be in. So America is very focused, and the West, in fact, Europe, Australia, very focused on building an independent supply chain outside of China.
And where can that supply chain be found? Because Rainbow Rare Earths, let's talk about what the company does.
At Rainbow, we believe at the forefront of helping build this independent supply chain outside of China. We have a very good large project in South Africa called Phalaborwa, where we're extracting rare earth elements out of phospho waste gypsum, which is a waste residue caused by the production of phosphoric acid, which is used in the fertilizer industry. In the hard rock phosphate at mine, you have rare earth elements, but not in economic grades enable you to mine the rock just for the rare earth elements. But because that phosphate rock was concentrated into a slurry fed into a phosphoric acid plant, the rare earths were upgraded in that process, and the rare earths deported with the waste residue called phosphogypsum onto 2 big stacks or stockpiles that we have at Phalaborwa in South Africa. We've got 35 million tons grading at 0.44% total rare earth oxides, which for this type of deposit is a very, very high grade deposit. And we've developed the process using known sort of mineral processes, but in a unique configuration. We've successfully been able to pilot on a large scale the extraction of these rare earths out of the phosphogypsum at Phalaborwa. And very importantly, we've got all 4 of these rare earth elements that are required for permanent magnets. We have the neodymium, praseodymium, dysprosium, and terbium in very economic quantities.
All this clearly expensive, right? I mean, you were just talking there about trials and ramping up the production. Looking at your last set of financial results, losses have been widening. But when you're talking about a process like this, I assume that's just par for the course.
Well, we are a typical development company in the mining space where you've got no revenue, so obviously you're having losses every year until you get into production. And this is normal, as I say, for a growth development company in the mining space. be that as it may, we are not really a mining company. We are extracting the rare earths using a chemical process, using RP, and effectively, we have a chemical waste residue as our stockpile, and we're extracting the rare earths out of this on a brownfield site in South Africa, in Phalaborwa, which is a well-known mining town. But because it's not a mining project, it's a chemical processing project, we have no economic empowerment, we have no government royalty that you typically incur, I should say, on a typical mining project. So that sets us apart, and we've got a very, very low cost in terms of capital and operating cost.
Okay, so how long before production, and what sort of percentage of the global demand for rare earths could this deliver?
Well, we are talking about we'll be producing 2,000 tons per annum of these critical rare earth elements. It's only a small volume, but very high value, obviously. But at 2,000 tons of the four rare earth elements I've mentioned, that is, in terms of production forecast to 2030, we're talking about production being at about 180,000 tons per annum. So it's a very small portion. So we need a lot more of these projects, and most of their production is driven by China. You have Lynas in Australia, a very large Australian producer. He's doing what Rainbow's doing. They produce a separated neodymium praseodymium oxide, and they produce the heavies, the dysprosium and terbium, in what's known as the SEG plus group, samarium, europium, and gadolinium. And the heavy elements are sitting in that basket. So I don't want to be too technical for your audience, but we do what Lynas from Australia have been doing. And Lynas from Australia, which is about a $6 billion market cap business, are producing about 6,000 tons of neodymium praseodymium, and we'll be almost a third of that size. So that's just to give you a comparative size. So it would be about a third of the size as Lynas, but much, much lower cost producer with a lower capital intensity to achieve that.
So that was George Bennett, the CEO of Rainbow Rare Earths. And, obviously we'd love to know if you like these interviews. What we're trying to do is a lot more chief execs and finance directors, as well as all those regular fund managers who bring us really fascinating insight. So don't forget to subscribe to this podcast, but we'd love, leave us a review. We really do like to hear what you think of the show.
And if you have not found the video version of the pod yet, do check us out on YouTube. Next week, Laura and Charlene are in the hot seat. And Dan, you've got a couple of interviews for us.
Well, yeah, I must admit, I say Danny and I have been going absolutely gangbusters trying to book up some brilliant people because, you have a little break over the summer and your mind starts thinking about, oh, that'd be a good person to get on, that'd be a good person. So we've locked in some brilliant people. So one of the interviews you're going to hear next week is Ben Preston, and he is portfolio manager on the Orbis Global Equity Fund. So he talks to me about Nintendo and actually how his funds managed to do really well without having, basically relying on big US tech companies. So don't miss that interview. It'll be on next week's podcast. So until then, thank you very much for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.
Before you go, please remember this podcast is for educational purposes, and the views expressed don't necessarily reflect those of AJ Bell or Shares Magazine. The podcast isn't telling you if a certain investment is suitable or not. Don't forget that the value of investments can change, and you can lose money as well as make it. It's also important to remember that how you're taxed will depend on your individual circumstances, and rules can change. The way an investment performed in the past may not be the same as how it behaves in the future. If you want help, go see a qualified financial advisor.